Hi there, this is our fourth class on discourse analysis, and we will be talking about field, tenor and mode. So the first thing we're going to do is define field, tenor, mode. There are different definitions of field, one of which is the following. Higgins states that field is the aboutness of the text or the topic. On the other hand, Halliday defines field as the job language is doing in a specific context of situation. The other variable, tenor, is typically defined as who is talking to whom. That is the beginning of our definition. However, we need to delve into tenor, that is, go deeper into what we mean by who's talking to whom. And what we will say is that a conversation, an interaction requires at least two components, self and other. So by who's talking to whom, what we mean is the self is talking to the other, and what we're interested in here is the ways in which the self constructs the other, or the ways in which self and other negotiate their social relationships via interaction. What about mode? What we will say here is that mode consists of two different categories. On the one hand, we will be talking about a channel, which Halliday states is either spoken or written, and we will now add multimodal. And on the other hand, we will be talking about media. What is media? Media has to do with the degree of spokenness or writtenness, and by spokenness or writtenness we mean the degree of lexical density and grammatical complexity or intricacy. These are all categories that we will account for in due time. In order to understand what field, tenor and mode mean, I think that we need to resort to a text that is the product of some sort of interaction with a stage that we will call production and a stage that we will call reception. Both production and reception are taken into account by the speakers and writers of different texts when they perform language in discourse-related contexts. All speakers and writers have tacit knowledge of the ways in which we interact. What we know implicitly is that we are always talking to some otherness. So the other is always there. That is clearly stated in theories of language, such as that developed by Benveniste, where the I and the you, the self and the other, are of utmost importance in the conception of language, interaction and discourse. Okay, let us be more concrete, let us be more specific about what we mean by production and reception of text. Let us think of a text that is produced in some sphere of social interaction. What is a social sphere? The social sphere of interaction is some sort of routine or routinized context of interaction between, again, self and other, to which we are habituated. So the concept of habitus will kick into the picture. Habitus means we are used to it. Therefore, we know the rules that regulate interaction. The text in question, the social sphere in question, will consist of two participants, teacher and student, and the action that the student will perform is to ask for an extension on the submission of her paper. So let us think of the following context. A student, let us call her Jane, has discovered that she has kind of run out of time and she cannot submit the paper, she won't be able to submit the paper in due time. That is, you will not be able to meet her deadline. So she decides to write an email to her teacher asking for an extension. Asking for an extension is the kind of job that language will be doing in this context of interaction. That is basically what we mean by field. So the technical category, the systemic functional linguistics technical category field, has to do with the job, again, that language is doing in a specific context of interaction. Let's go to Bachtin now. It is an interaction that takes place in a habitus, or a situation to which we are habituated, a situation that is routinized. Very often students need to ask for extensions. So this what we mean by field is not the aboutness of the text. Or we can say, I am quoting Susanne Higgins. Let us say that it is the aboutness of the text, where aboutness means, where a topic means, what we're doing is an action. It's something we're performing, and we can think of the term performance. More specifically, we can think of social interaction as some sort of performance to which we're used. Okay, I've got Jane's email here, so I'm going to read from the text verbatim, because I don't want to interfere with her wording. The mail reads the following way. Hi John, I have just noticed that I won't be able to submit the paper tomorrow because I've been very busy lately, and I will submit it next week. Thanks in advance, best, Jane. Okay, that's the end of the mail. So the question here is the following. Again, let us talk about field. What has Jane done? Has she asked for an extension? Has she asked for a favor of her teacher? Or is she imposing some sort of action, performance? So the question here is, who will decide when to submit the paper, whether we should meet deadlines? So the question here is, who's going to decide when papers should be submitted? So again, the question that we need to answer is she asking a favor of her teacher, or is she telling her teacher, informing her teacher what she will do? What one must conclude from the mail that we have just read is that Jane is definitely not asking for an extension. On the contrary, she's telling her teacher what she would do without her teacher having the possibility of any sort of decision in the decision-making process that teachers make regarding schedules and submissions and tests and the like. So, field has to do with doings, what we do with language. And what we do with language has to fit the frame. What do we mean by frame? What is framing? Framing is a category that Lakoff, a semanticist, uses to talk about the context of interaction and the kind of actions that are expected in the different spheres of social life. So what the action that the student is performing doesn't fit the frame. That is, the frame is the set of expected actions. So you're not expected to impose on your teacher, to impose your will on your teacher. What you're expected to do is what has been routinized again in a culture. That is, if you want an extension, you should ask for an extension. You should not impose your will on your teacher by telling your teacher that you have decided to submit the paper on a certain date because you haven't had the time to do it so far. So, asking for an extension on the submission of your paper will be one social action to which we're habituated. In fact, we have talked about that in our class on genre. We have talked about the different kinds of contexts, the zillions of contexts that make up a specific culture. Then we're going to think of other actions. Think of requesting, suggesting, asserting, inviting, offering. We will deal with these actions when we talk about speech acts. For the time being, I think we've said enough about field. Let us talk about tenor. What is tenor? Again, tenor has to do with constructing and negotiating social relationships. When we negotiate social relationships, we need, of course, to use language. Tenor is originally or initially defined as who's talking to whom. The expression who's talking to whom will be our point of departure, given that if we remain there, we're not saying much really. By who's talking to whom, what we're thinking is, who are the social interactants? How do they construct their social interaction? Which is their level of intimacy? Who gets to decide what in which context? And more importantly, how we construct ourselves, the self, and others, the other, interaction. This is what tenor is all about. And we will connect tenor with interpersonal meaning. So let us go back to the email that Jane has written to her teacher, John. So again, the mail goes, "Hi John, I will stress the pronoun I for some specific purpose. I've noticed that I won't be able to submit the paper. I've been busy. I'll submit it next week." So on the one hand, we may want to notice that the text is I or me centered. It's all about me, right? I got problems, I cannot submit it, etc., etc., etc. So there is a suppression in the text of the other. Not only in the text, but a suppression of the other from the context of production and reception of text. The student is not considering the fact that, and is not acknowledging by means of her actions, is not acknowledging the fact that it is the teacher's prerogative to decide who will submit what when. So, in more colloquial, informal terms, who gets to call the shots here? Who gets to decide when papers are going to be submitted? And decisions are made, again, based on what is routinized, what is culturally stipulated. That is, what fits the frame. In Lakev's terms, we're talking about framing. We're talking about expected and unexpected actions. So the teacher in question here, in this interaction in particular, is being construed again as someone who has no say in the decision-making process of this specific interaction. We will borrow a term, a category from politeness theory, more specifically the category face, to elaborate a little on what we mean by the construction of self and other. So if I, the student, tell the teacher when he or she should do something, again, we're talking about setting deadlines that students are expected to meet. If the student gets to tell the teacher, the student is performing what we will call a face-threatening act. What is a face-threatening act? In order to understand what a face-threatening act is all about, we first need to define face. And we will define face as the public self-image. So we all have a public self-image. We will say that we have a positive phase and a negative phase. The positive phase is our need to be liked and to be respected, not abused by others. Our negative phase is our right to be independent, to do as we please. We will have a whole class on phase theory and politeness theory. We're simply here borrowing the term, the category, phase, in order to account for what we mean by interpersonal meaning. So when the student is calling the shots, deciding what she will do, rather than allowing the teacher to do so, and in so doing fitting the frame by means of her actions, she's performing a face-threatening act. That is, what she's doing is threatening to the teacher's face, more specifically to the teacher's positive face, and probably the negative face as well, because she is imposing on her teacher. So there are two threatening actions. If teachers allow students to decide what they can do, they are not fulfilling their role, one of their roles as teachers, that is scheduling classes and scheduling assignments, and as a consequence their positive face will be threatened. They will not look good. They are not playing the role they should play. On the other hand, there is also a threat on the teacher's negative face, because the teacher is being imposed upon by his student, and that is something that fits the frame. Therefore, the suppression of the teacher, as illustrated in the mail we have just read, again doesn't fit the frame. It's not part of our culturally determined social routinized actions to which we are habituated, and is considered to be socially wrong. Now, when I say socially wrong, I'm talking about social expectations. This is what we mean by interpersonal meaning. So meaning is functional. It's got to do with what we do with language and how language has an impact on the construction of the self and the construction of the other. So far we have stated that there are actions, field, and these actions will contribute to the construction of self and other, tenor. Next we will discuss mode. Okay, what about mode? What we will say here is that mode is a category that will kick into the picture, will fit the frame in the following way. Mode is binary. That is, it can be divided, can be dealt with in the following way. We need, on the one hand, to talk about channel, and on the other hand, we will talk about media. Number one, what is channel? Well, Halliday defines channel as either written or spoken, but he was talking about channel back in the 70s, and I think that we need to talk about multimodal channels, and in fact there has been a lot of advances in research in multimodal language. We can think of Len Answorth and Van Leeuwen, Van Leeuwen has written a book called Reading Images. That is, the language of or how system functional linguistics can be used to interpret not only written and spoken means of communication, but also images, a whole other language. And I'm using the term language in a metaphorical sense. What we mean by language is written, spoken language. There is language that is dependent on syntactic structure, spelling, orthography, sound waves, phonological phenomena. We're not talking about images when we use the term language. Images belong to a whole other domain of semiotic construction of meaning in its own right. We're not saying it's inferior, we're not saying it's superior, we're saying it's different. Okay, let's go back to James email. Jane wrote an email. However, she could have decided to go some other way. She could have talked to the teacher in person, face-to-face interaction, where you will have immediate feedback. If you write an email, you may or you may not have immediate feedback. Definitely, there is no face-to-face interaction. She could have written or sent a WhatsApp message. She could have texted the teacher. She could have called the teacher on the phone. She could have done a number of things. So basically, channel, again, is a system. It's systemic. That is, there is a number of things that we can do, and we pick one out of many because we think that that is the best choice in terms of interpersonal meaning. That is, the best way in which I can handle this situation is by means of a face-to-face interaction or an email. So our mind entertains different possibilities whenever we're thinking of performing some kind of interaction. And we pick one out of many because we think, again, that that is the best interpersonal tenor, interpersonal choice for a specific field. That is, for the performance of a specific action in a specific context of production and reception of text. Again, in some sphere of social life. So notice how the three components, mode, tenor and field, interact all the time, at the same time, in a specific context or genre or sphere of social life. They interact at the same time, all the time, in the construction and production of text in interaction. Now, what about the other category that is related to mode, namely media? Media has to do with the degree of writtenness or spokenness of the text. More informally, we can talk about degrees of formality and informality. Now, mode has to do with the way in which the grammar that we select will fit the frame. So we can have a more or less nominalized grammar. In Introduction to Systemic Functional Linguistics, Higgins provides us with the following example. A student is telling his teacher the following: I have turned in my paper late because my kids were sick. Let us take this sentence and let us compare it to this other sentence. The reason for the late submission of the paper was the sickness of my kids. When I ask my students in class which sentence is or evokes spoken language, they unanimously say the first one, the former, and they also unanimously claim that the latter, the second sentence that I mentioned, is a sentence that is typically used in written language, typically evokes writtenness. That is, it's a sentence that they will find in written contexts. Now what I do is the following. I write both sentences on the board. So what I ask them is, how can we know, how can we tell that the former, the first text, is spoken and the second is written, when I have just written both sentences on the board? So the conclusion that we need to reach is the following. Writtenness and spokenness are not related to the fact that we are either writing or speaking. That's got to do with channel. That is, I have resorted to the writing of the sentences, that is, the graphic channel. That is what Halliday would call the graphic channel. In spite of that, students are able to tell the difference between spoken and written language. So, my students have been confronted with two sentences, one of which they claim to evoke spoken language, the other written language. The question that we need to answer is, how come they can tell that the sentence is written or spoken when in fact they see both sentences by means of the visual channel, that is, they have written them, I have written them. The answer to that question lies in the fact that there is something about the grammar of writing and something about the grammar of speaking. In fact, Halliday wrote the book that is called Writing Science, to make reference to the way in which scientists write in academic contexts. That is, there is a mode media. There is a way of writing in science, there is a way of writing obituaries, there is a way of writing articles, essays, 3-minute bedtime stories, etc., etc., etc. I mean, different genres, subgenres, text types in different contexts of interaction will require different ways of writing, and more specifically, we will say that they will require different media, whereby media, for instance, we can talk about degrees of nominalization. That is what we call grammatical metaphor. So let us go back to Suzanne Higgins's sentences. I have turned in my essay late because my kids were sick. And the second sentence, so that's number one. Number two, the reason for the late submission of the essay was the sickness of my kids. If we analyze sentence one and sentence two, we will say that the first will evoke spoken language given a number of criteria. The first criterion that we will discuss is grammatical complexity. Number one is more grammatically complex because it consists of two clauses. I have turned in my essay late, clause one, because my kids were sick, clause number two. In the second example, the reason for the late submission of the essay was the sickness of my kids. We have only one sentence. So, two sentences versus one sentence. This is a quantitative criterion. In the first sentence, I turned in my essay late. The sentence proper, the clause, has the structure subject predicate. That is, the message is conveyed by means of a clause. In the nominalized version of the sentence in question, the message I have turned in my essay late is conveyed by means of what we will call a noun group. That is, the late submission of the essay. Notice that this is a group, noun group, not a clause. The second clause in the spoken version, my kids were sick, is realized in the nominalized version by means of a noun group as well. So we'll go for the sickness of my kids. So what we're saying here is that we're changing the type of grammar from a clause-based or grounded grammar, that is a clausal grammar in spoken language. We move on to a nominalized noun group grounded or based grammar in written language. Therefore, what we're saying here is that there are two grammars. The grammar of spoken English based on clauses with their subjects and predicates, and a grammar of written language based on noun groups that will convey the message. Again, the sickness of my kids and the late submission of the paper. Therefore, it is interesting to note that the verb turn in the spoken version has become a noun, submission. The adjective sick has become a noun, sickness. and the connector because has become a noun reason. And then we have nouns like paper and kids, and they have remained nouns. So conclusion, all word categories have become nouns. That is why the written version is the nominalized version, and the information has been condensed into noun groups. Again, the sickness of my kids and the late submission of the paper. This process is called nominalization, condensation, also packing of information. Instead of the unpacking of the clause, we got the packing of the noun group, which makes language lexically dense. That is, there is this accumulation of lexical or content words, like the late submission of the paper, the sickness of my kids. And notice that now in the noun group, the connectors are the prepositions. The sickness of my kids, the late submission of the paper. The prepositions are used as connectors. The verb be, the reason for the late submission of the paper, is the sickness of my kids. So is considered to be a relational process. In this case, a verb. A relational process is a verb that is used as a connector. So verbs are connectors at times. Think of traditional grammar. In traditional grammar, the verb be is called a linking verb, linking between subject and predicate, where subject and predicate are, in this case, noun groups that convey the messages that in the spoken version is conveyed by the clause. So we have a clausal grammar and we have a nominalized grammar. So let us recap some of the things that we have just said, and then we will go back to our email written by Jane. We will try to improve on it. We're going to try to make the mail fit the frame. So what I would like to say about spoken language is that it is grammatically complex. By complex we mean there are more clauses, or I should say there are clauses. Is a clausal grammar. On the other hand, written language is grammatically simple, not complex. There are no clauses. There is a different kind of complexity. Complexity will take place at the level of the noun group by means of constructing condensed noun groups where we pack all the information in smaller units. So, whereas spoken language is grammatically complex, written language is lexically dense. This is what we mean by condensation, packing, and nominalizing. So let's go back to Jane. It so happens that before sending the email, Jane has decided to share her letter with her friend Rachel. So Rachel reads the email and she thinks that probably they can come up with an email that will be more suitable for the frame. There is an email that will fit the frame. And they come up with the following email. I'm going to read again verbatim so that we do not interfere with what people have actually said. The mail reads the following way. Dear Mr. Thompson, I hope this email will find you well. The reason for writing to you is the following. Due to personal matters of most inconvenience for the normal functioning of my life and routine, I will not be able to meet the required deadline, in which case I kindly refer to you in the hope that you consider the possibility of granting me an extension of the said deadline. Look forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Jane. I think that this email is much more accurate, much more socially accurate than the first email. Let me tell you why. To begin with, the email, the writer of the email goes, I kindly refer to you. That is, if you are asking a favor of someone, probably you will want to use some politeness strategy in order to mitigate the effect of the imposition on the other, because when you ask for an extension on a deadline, you're imposing your will. That is what you want, not what the teacher wants. You're imposing your will on others. Again, interpersonal meaning. However, you can mitigate, and in fact these terms and these strategies are called mitigating strategies, mitigating devices, mitigating terms, such as I kindly refer to you, are mitigating devices that enable the speaker to soften or cushion the effect of the imposition. So we go on, in the hope that you'll consider the possibility of granting. Probably we can be critical of the mail and say it's too wordy. Well, that's probably the case, so we can come up with another version and yet another version. We can be critical of this email, but it is definitely much better than the other email. So, consider the possibility of granting me an extension of the set deadline. So, notice that the wording is a bit more nominalized. However, I, as the person who is requiring a favor of you, who is asking for something, right? Not imposing, but asking, requesting, and you is construed as someone who's got a say, who's got a decision-making power in this context of interaction. So, interpersonally speaking, the email is more adequate, it's more appropriate, it's more accurate, socially speaking. That's why we talk about interpersonal meaning or social meaning. Also, notice the very interesting fact that politeness here, that is an acknowledgement that there is some otherness there, not a suppression of the other, is translated into a higher degree of linguistic effort. There is more wording, there is accounting of the reasons why you're doing this and you're doing that. You're bothering, you're not writing a very short email. It's not a question of length. What I'm saying is you're not, like being brief. You are elaborating on the reasons, you're elaborating on the language, and basically you're bothering, yes. So that is the fact that you are asking, you're requesting, is translated into the amount of language that you're doing. Again, it's not just a question of quantity, it's quantity and quality, the way it is worded. It's more nominalized. Now, if we went for a higher level of nominalization, that would entail a higher level of impersonalization, which would not be accurate for the actual context of interaction. We're responsible for the things that we're doing, in this case, the requesting or the asking of a favor by a student of a teacher. Also notice that the email starts off in the following way. I hope this email will find you well. I hope this email will find you well. The first line reveals a concern for the other, an action which was not present in the first email. What we should consider is, number one, the fact that is it right to write an email asking for an extension due to personal matters? So that's probably the first consideration. The answer would be no. You write an email to ask for an extension if, for example, you've had health-related problems. That is, if you've been sick. So you will write something like, due to health-related issues or health-related problems, I have not been able, or I will not be able to submit the paper or to meet the deadline. So the first thing that we need to consider is which are the reasons why we are writing the email. And these considerations, again, have to do with considerations that meet the requirements of the frame. That is, are we fitting or are we not fitting the frame? So I have provided you with basically 2 sample emails for the same kind of action, and we have analyzed a number of factors, a number of issues related to this interaction and the ways in which the interaction was linguistically constructed. There is a lot more that we can say, but I think that we have at least partially succeeded. What we want to do here is help you understand what we mean by genre. It's a concept that we're reviewing here, but the focus definitely is on field, tenor, mode. How field, tenor, mode are realized in a specific genre, in a specific sphere of social life. So we hope that this class has helped you get a hang, or be closer to getting a hang of what field, tenor and mode, the variables of the context of situation, do in language. How they are construed, what kind of job they do, basically what we mean by field, tenor, mode. This is the aim of this class, and how the 3 variables of the context of situation establish some kind of dialogue with context of culture, namely genre. That's all we have to say in today's class. We hope that it's been of use to you. If you have any questions, please write them below in comments. If you have questions, if you have comments, criticisms, suggestions of any kind, and we will be only happy to respond.